Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a pleasure and an honor to come to the closing speech of this year's journeys of the BRICS Study Group of the University of São Paulo. And it is with pleasure that I announce our speaker today. Again, thank you, Otaviano Canuto, for being with us once more. Otaviano Canuto served as Vice President and Executive Director at the World Bank, Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund, and Vice President at the Inter-American Development Bank. He was also Secretary for International Affairs at the Ministry of Finance and an economics professor at the University of São Paulo and Unicamp. Currently, he is a senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, a professor at the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University, and an affiliated professor at Mohammed VI Polytechnic University. He earned his master's degree at Concordia University in Montreal and his PhD at Unicamp, both in economics. Otaviano Canuto, thank you for being with us. You have the floor.
Thank you for having me here, Professor Paulo, and hello, colleagues, hello, friends. It's really a pleasure to be back here. You know, my period at the multilateral institutions included 2 years when I was a senior advisor on BRICS countries at the World Bank Group. So I had the opportunity to accompany a bit the outgrowth of the BRICS, and reported to the president of the World Bank at the time on the BRICS. I saw the inception. To a large extent, the grouping of BRICS came out as a way, as a channel to boost the power, the voice of the constituent countries, first Brazil, India, China, and Russia, and then joined by the South Africa in 2010. And it succeeded to a large extent in the sense that those countries managed to raise their share in the capital of the World Bank Group, and as well as their quotas at the IMF. But at the same time, it became clear that there would be a limit in that regard. I personally, for instance, by coincidence, was back at the board of the World Bank in 2018 when we had a negotiation of a capital increase of the bank, and I could note clearly the limits up to which the shares of these countries might go up in these institutions. Okay, so then the group decided to create its own bank, the New Development Bank. The size was not that much big because the intention was to maintain the equal shareholding among the five. And then the Chinese come with an additional one, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And the fact of the matter is that we have now this diversity of multilateral banking institutions, something that was already there, but now it's increasingly more important. Mention should be made as well to the currency sharing agreements. Well, the one among BRICS countries is not the only one. China itself has done lots of bilateral swaps with many countries. If any of you has an interest on this topic, I I suggested a link to a text of mine on the rising use of local currencies. The fact of the matter is that one may say that the BRICS, particularly now that is being enlarged, they are, let's say, they are demonstration on how we are watching the dawning of a new age of international relations. You have a declining share of global GDP corresponding to, let's say, the traditional advanced economies, and the world is becoming increasingly multipolar, right? And so countries are jostling to establish their positions in the emerging order, and that includes both emerging economies represented by the expanded BRICS grouping, right? But also smaller countries attempting to cultivate relationships that can safeguard their interests. So the BRICS, which began as an asset class, has become a symbol of the yearning of a more broadly representative global order. Now, while the diversity of the grouping's members and applicants, as aptly said, highlights the broad appeal of the BRICS Plus, it also creates challenge. So the countries, components of the BRICS have very different political systems, very different economies as well, and national goals. Of course, I'm not even referring here to the occasional standoffs among countries. We saw, the fact that there was this conversation in agreements between China and India during this the latest BRICS meeting demonstrates how you really had there an underlying difficulty of coordination. But the point to make is that translating shared interests into a common plan of action, right, and becoming a unified force on the global stage was difficult, well, even when BRICS had just 5 members. But now with 9 and possibly more member countries, establishing a common identity and agenda will require a sustained effort, right? But we should keep in mind that other multilateral groupings that are not formal chartered-based institutions with permanent secretariats. I'm thinking here of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the G20 itself, and even the G7. They also struggle with internal divisions, right? But in any case, let me address to a large extent what were the major topics or the 2 broad issues of the BRICS meeting, BRICS Plus meeting of this week, because by going over those 2 topics, we may have an idea exactly of how far the BRICS should evolve in order to become a more cohesive group. First, the 2 major issues addressed in the 2024 BRICS Summit were the future expansion, right, with adhesion of new members, as well as the second topic, the efforts to promote the use of local currencies to reduce the reliance on the United States dollar, right? As one could expect, the summit did not overcome some disagreement on the geopolitical alignment of the bloc. After all, while Russia and China are actively supporting the development of, let's call it an anti-Western agenda, you have Brazil, India, and South Africa that are prioritizing a non-aligned stance. And in the moment when this difference in views appears more clearly is during the debates about the BRICS future expansion. So let's go a bit over on different perspectives from what one can gauge by the action. In the case of Russia, of course, President Vladimir Putin intends to leverage the institution, the bloc, as a platform for reinforcing anti-Western messaging and bolstering support for so-called non-Western multilateral institutions, right? Of course, for obvious reasons, this became a more prominent since the Ukraine invasion in 2022, right? But also Russia tries to demonstrate parity with countries such as China, India, Brazil, and South Africa through its role as a summit host this time. Of course, Moscow is not prepared to manage the internal divisions within BRICS, right? And as one expected, when it comes to adhesion of new members, the outcomes from the summit were relatively modest, with including the refusal of Venezuela, and including with, we must recognize that, even within the new members, you have countries that are not necessarily aligned. You have Saudi Arabia and you have Iran. And so truth must be said that the ambition cannot be too high in terms of unifying the BRICS as a cohesive group because of the diversity. The other topic also insisted by the host is with respect to the rising use of local currencies, right? Which is a process already in course. China has been expanding their set of bilateral swap agreements, which are designed exactly to facilitate a smoother, de-dollarized trade among BRICS countries, right? And in the BRICS, well, at the same time, the Russians came with insisting on a BRICS common currency proposal, but that's another story. The increasing use of bilateral swap agreements, the increasing use of local currencies is a reality, and this appears already in the statistics of a rising share of the renminbi into global trade finance transactions, in detriment to the dollar. The dollar is not being wound out because of its remaining function as a reserve of value. In order for the renminbi one day to aspire to replace the dollar as a reserve currency, it will have to liberalize its financial flows and so on. This is not in the immediate horizon. And by the way, I was personally a member at the board of the IMF when China's renminbi was incorporated into the basket of currencies of the special drawing rights. And there was an agenda then, as a precondition for that to happen, to connect the financial parks in Hong Kong with continental China, Hong Kong, China with continental China. China did it, and the renminbi was approved to be one of the SDR currencies, together with the sterling pound, the US dollar, the euro, and the Japanese yen. But that was followed by a tremendous outflow of $300 billion, almost from night to day. And the Chinese authorities decided to reestablish the grip on capital outflows. So there is clearly conscience by the Chinese authorities that in order to replace the dollar as a store of value, they would have to undergo such an agenda. But they rather move, to the extent of possible, by the replacement of the dollar with the renminbi in trade transactions as, let's say, a more modest but achievable objective. Whereas this achievability cannot be said about the common currency. The common currency of the BRICS would suppose banking union. It would have to suppose a degree of integration of institutions of the member countries that is not, let's say, realistic to expect in the near future. But the second topic of which is the rising use of local currencies, that's a reality. Now, well, China, my take, obviously, I would say that, beyond no doubt, China is happy with the direction of travel of the BRICS because it highlights, it exhibits China's influence with, let's say, the so-called global South, right? Of course, China would clearly prefer the BRICS to eventually become a counterweight, not only to the G7, but also to G20, right? And the message coming from Beijing, to the extent of my accompaniment on the boom in China's trade with other BRICS countries over the last 15 years. China is the largest trade partner of Brazil. It has overcome the US, both in terms of exports and imports. And of course, with this boom in China's trade, and the reinvention of global trade importance towards global South countries leads to the increase in the volume of trade that is denominated in renminbi. And that's why, let's say, with regard to expansion, clearly China is, in principle, supportive of including new members, right? But at the same time, it will be concerned with the preservation of consensus. So, well, that would explain to a large extent that some other candidate countries, if you think of the North Africa, both Morocco and Algeria manifested signals of interest in joining, but since they do not align, having them both would create an additional source of attrition, like the one that potentially exists between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and so on. Now, let's take my take on the Brazilian view. And one may say that signals are clear that Brazil has showed some hesitance on expansion, right? Among other reasons, because of the possibility of potential dilution of Brazil's influence within the bloc, right? Of course, despite this reservation, Brazil surrendered to diplomatic pressure to admit more members, right? And Brazil tried to propose Argentina as a way to boost the region, but it didn't work out with the result of the election in the Argentina and the adhesion and the assumption of President Milei and so on. And by the way, talking about the rising use of local currencies, before President Milei took over the government in Argentina, we should remind ourselves of how the currency swap line between the PBOC, the People's Bank of China, and the Central Bank of Argentina allowed Argentina to avoid a default on its payments to the IMF. It could borrow. And since the renminbi is already a currency that is part of the SDRs, nobody could object in that regard. And Argentina was saved from defaulting from the IMF by resorting to the to the swap line with China. The picture is a bit different in the case of Brazil, because Brazil has strictly a tendency to exhibit a surplus with China in trade and the inflows of capital. So most likely the rising use of local currencies between Brazil and China will lead to Brazil piling up reserves in renminbi, which are not as convertible as the ones in the US dollar, okay? So in any case, Brazil supports the use of local currencies for bilateral trade, but opposes creating a common currency. So the common currency is a dream. Now, let's think of India, right? Of course, the biggest geopolitical fault line among the 5 core members, the original ones, is the relationship between India and China. India would tend to oppose any expansion of BRICS that would be perceived to largely benefit China. India, for instance, has opposed the blockchain model designed by Russia as an alternative to SWIFT. Yes, that's an important point. That would take us for a long discussion on how the use of digital currencies may boost the project of replacing the dollar. Ironically, benefiting from an experiment that the Bank for International Settlements has developed in Asia. Paradoxical, but that's an interesting aspect of the recent evolution. The idea of using blockchain models to build up an alternative to SWIFT, to the payment network, the access to which by Russia was cut after the invasion. Not only Russia, but also Iran has suffered blockades in that line. So in any case, India will probably be a dragging force on the expansion of the BRICS. Now, South Africa, right? The South Africa clearly is focused on enhancing the economic diplomacy by enhancing trade and tourism relationships with the existing and new BRICS members. So South Africa is maybe, well, and by the way, South Africa's foreign minister and central bank governor, whom I know quite well, they have not been supportive of the proposed BRICS common currency, right? Or even to the adoption of an alternative to the SWIFT international payment systems. As I said, you know, the diversity of interests and views among the BRICS countries is something that, like other coalitions, the group will have to live with and find only the common ground that may allow to become material proposals. Interestingly, we had 4 other countries interested in joining the BRICS last year, right? Algeria, as I said, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Senegal. Egypt and Ethiopia have now been accepted as members. Algeria has changed its position, and also you have the interest by Morocco. Nigeria has also recently expressed its foreign policies as attaining membership in the G20. And so for the time being, South Africa is the only major African economy, but it tends to be followed by other, right? So just, let's say, in order to open space for us for some discussion here, let me say that while the BRICS aligns with certain global ambitions of China, it does not necessarily imply that members are assuming an expressly, let's say, anti-Western stance. You cannot say that the countries like Brazil India and South Africa are anti-Western, right? But in any case, the exuberance of BRICS can be interpreted as a symptom of, let's say, of a more widespread geopolitical fragmentation. And it is a form for emerging powers to engage in important bilateral discussions. That's the new world we're living through as I started this talk. Namely, you have fragmentation, you have multipolarity, and for countries like 3 of the original BRICS members, the intention will be to co-live through some of these poles in the multipolar world, trying to not to be excluded of any of them. I hope this has been a good summary of where the BRICS are, the issue of membership and the challenge in that regard, and the monetary agenda, which will succeed in terms of rising use of local currencies, particularly the renminbi, but not necessarily on the common currency. The common currency is a dream that may be held by Russia, but which doesn't have the grounds in terms of adhesion and unification by the member countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Otaviano Canuto. I do fully agree with you. And concerning the common currency, you qualified as a dream. It is something which we had a lot of talk about a common currency in the Mercosur, the common market of the South. And this was something that every time it was raised up, I used to answer that you can't possibly have a common currency among countries that have completely different exchange policies, inflation rates, and the macroeconomic regulations, so that you need very strong convergence of these major factors before you can build a common currency. So the economist, you are the economist, but this is something which was so often mentioned in connection with the Mercosur, and I was convinced that it could not possibly be carried out, even less in the case of BRICS, where the differences and the fluidity of the convergence is much bigger and stronger than in the case of the Mercosur.
It's true. And Professor Paulo, it's suffice to look at the euro.
Yes.
The euro is it's a project still incomplete in its realization. It succeeded in unified monetarily, but the lack of a fiscal unity was the major factor behind the euro crisis that we watched after the global financial crisis. And not by chance, there was a breathe after the announcement of a joint issuance of bonds during the pandemic and so on. But it's still the differences in the lack of fiscal unity because of the resistance by the Germans, particularly, or the northern countries, lies behind as a fragility of the euro. The project of unification by the euro has not been completed after so many years, 24 years. So, someone may dream, oh, let's do a currency of the Mercosur or the BRICS, but the underlying necessity of monetary and economic and institutional unification is something that is not achievable, doesn't seem on the horizon.
Sure. So big are the differences among these countries, for sure. And I was intrigued when you mentioned that the Bank for International Settlement, in an inadvertent way, boosted the use of digital currencies. Could you elaborate a bit further on that?
Yes. starting as well, as you know, the Bank for International Settlements, also known as the central bank of all central banks, started an experiment, a pilot of use of digital currencies among a set of Asian central banks. And China participated as well. And now many other countries, many other central banks want to join it. And according to the reports that started in 2019, it has succeeded extremely well. And apparently the coding and so on was provided by China, with the participation as well. And that's quite interesting how the US is lagging behind on digital currencies. In some regards, we Brazilians, for instance, had a payment mechanism, electronic payment mechanism that's so successful, the PIX, right? That demonstrated how possible it is to have an electronic payment system. And whereas here in the US, where I live, I'm speaking from the headquarters of the World Bank. This process of evolution of electronic payments has lagged behind. And this means, the digital payments, they have a strong potential of reducing transaction costs. And it is incredible how the resistance of the adoption of electronic payment systems here in the US has curbed. No, a leap has been given in the last few years. I'm a testimony of that since I've been living here for 21 years. But the fact of the matter is that what the Asian countries have already done, including China, and what with this experiment pilot by the BIS, let's say, animated some of those proponents of a common currency by say, see, look, let's do a common digital currency and so on. The bureaucrats of the BIS must be, in a situation now being complained about, but it's a fact. Of course, costs of transactions would not be the major determinant of the use of a currency, but truth be said, that if the use of local currencies, the rising use of local currencies among the BRICS members evolves towards electronic transactions, the reduction of transaction costs will be a favorable aspect that should be taken into account. The other central banks should look at it. Of course, the problematic is see, that's not going to be easy, particularly for the US, because of the following. The SWIFT, although based in Belgium, all transactions pass by some bank in the US. And that's why with the SWIFT, to some extent, the US authorities can monitor and check and eventually block transactions by some subgroups. That's the way by which they attempted to control, to impede the terrorist financing or the illegal illegal money has been maneuvered. The proposal coming from Russia is to use distributed ledgers. See, so it's over decentralized, and in that regard, not liable to be, let's say, monitored and surveilled. That's one of the major, let's say, points of doubt in the ongoing evolution of technology, which is this relationship between, on the one hand, the development of electronic trading, and on the other, transparency and the ability of being monitored by authorities. That's a fascinating and open topic.
Well, this could be a topic for next year. Yes,
Definitely.
I guess, Priscilla, you can note it down. And Priscilla has some questions from the audience to you, Otaviano.
We have actually 3 questions from the audience. 2 of them regarding the Belt and Road Initiative. I will start with those. One of the members from our audience asked, what are the implications for Brazil if it enters into the Belt and Road Initiative? And a question that is very linked to this one, so I will just make it already. As the Belt and Road Initiative have more than 140 countries now, could this mean a greater geopolitical influence of China? In your opinion, could China take the lead of the BRIC Plus?
Right. Great. Fantastic questions. On the Belt and Road Initiative, I could have posted here a link to a recent paper that I produced on what I called BRI, Belt and Road Initiative 3.0. 3.0. The fact is that people keep referring to the BRI as if it was still in its first phase, the phase of the apogee, the phase of substantial, humongous flows of finance from China, not only to you know the map. We could have posted here the map connecting China to Europe through the East Europe, and as well as down through the sea by Djibouti and Ethiopia. But also when Xi Jinping said at Davos, okay, if Latin America wants to join, welcome, very welcome. See, definitely is the BRI has been an instrument of a leverage of soft power by China. Multiple wins for China. Multiple wins in which sense? Besides the obvious soft power increase with the finance, but also China was able to use the BRI to the extent of possible for them to use the idle capacity in their construction industry that was too big, and with idle capacity as the level of investments in construction started to fall in China, but also finance, a good use of foreign reserves. So it was a triple win. In some projects, even China brought in workers from China, but that was not the major accent. Now, and with a very reasonably commercial approach. Even if in the beginning the BRI didn't have, let's say, very stringent criteria with respect to environmental sustainability, of social responsibility. The fact of the matter is that the figures in the paper, the link of which I can post here, some years financed by from the BRI was even bigger than the finance by the World Bank. And in the case of Latin America, some years there was more money coming from China than the sum of money coming from the World Bank and the IDB, just to give an idea of the volume. Now, the Chinese approach always had, let's say, the attempt to incorporate collaterals as guarantees for those loans, be it oil, as was the case with Venezuela and Ecuador, be it more broader guarantees as it tried to do with the port in Sri Lanka that was financed within the BRI. That collateral in the case of Sri Lanka was harder to exercise, but not the other one. Now, the reason why I'm recollecting this is that at a certain moment, China itself, and that was before the pandemic, by 2019, we had a tremendous drop in the flows associated with the BRI, dropped brutally. To some extent, not only, let's say, the phase of interest in investments in commodity and in natural resource by China had reached a peak, but also China itself realized how much of that lending China will not recover. It went beyond, so defaults would be inevitable as they happened. And so let's say China took the foot out of the pedal, right, and decelerated the BRI. And that's what I called in my paper BRI 2.0, which is when China sends the flows just in the amount necessary to avoid defaults. That was the case with Venezuela. Venezuela started to receive annual flows roughly corresponding to the debt service with China, simply to avoid a default, but without any new fresh money, right? And also that's when China develops several of the mechanisms to eventually help financially the client countries. The currency swap line between the PBOC and Argentina helped in that regard, saving Argentina last year. So that was the China 2.0. The flows, the statistics in my paper are, demonstrate that, how it went down the ground. But since last year, it has entered into what it has been called China 3.0. BRI 3.0. BRI 3.0 is, as described by President Xi Jinping, smaller and more beautiful projects. So it's not the big amount of money associated with mines and oil production of the previous decades, but it is more of a cleaner and projects, and guess what? Associated with clean energy, which now corresponds to the new stage of the new priorities, the merging of expansion of China, which is, as President Xi Jinping described quite well, associated with clean energy investments. So the Belt and Road Initiative 3.0 will support the foreign investment of the expansion of the clean energy by China in the recipient countries. Going to Brazil. See, even without being a formal member of the BRI, Brazil already occupied a key position in terms of portfolio of BRI for Latin America and the Caribbean, the major client, and with investments particularly in oil extraction, as we remember, hydropower. Remember how the transmission of energy from Belo Monte has been acquired, and there has been investments of Chinese, because the Chinese have, I said, BRI focusing on commodity production, but also at the same time starting to focus on service of energy service, on transportation, management of ports, management to some extent, management of roads. So that has been an emphasis. So my point is that it will not make any major difference, except for symbolic, if Brazil joins the BRI, because it's not the formal entrance of Brazil into the BRI that might change any of the the roles played by Brazil as a destination of FDI in US, in the Americas. And the point is that what we can expect Brazil and other countries, as I said, is an increasing emphasis on resource coming from China being associated with either managing previous debt or new areas associated with clean energy. That we're about to see the rise. BYD has arrived. The traditional Brazilian automobile manufacturers should be concerned with that, like the Germans are suffering. Well, Ford has already left the country. And that's where I see the connection between Brazil and China will be in the future. Trade, as it has, in the case of FDI, particularly associated with clean energy.
Thank you. One final question from Julia. The BRICS performance has extrapolated the economic sphere and is entering the geopolitical sphere now. How does Mr. Canuto analyze its advance?
Well, see, which the question fits quite well with the way I propose the discussion. You have an economic agenda. The economic agenda, of course, intermingled with the political issues. Of course, the rising use of local currencies can be related to the desire to be off the screen of surveillance and punishment by European or US authorities. That goes beyond any doubt. But fact of the matter is that in the inception, it had an economic agenda. Unified negotiations. I can tell you that when I was at the board of executive directors at the IMF and at the World Bank, and that was the final part of my journey with these institutions. The executive directors of the BRICS countries met regularly. So we had regular meetings among us, among the five of us, to discuss the items of the agenda. And then whenever possible, we took joint positions, and that strengthened our bargaining power. So there was, and there is, not always, sometimes they did not converge. I can say a bit about this. But the fact of the matter is that there was clearly an economic agenda, and that materialized as well in the creation of the NDBs and the signature of the currency sharing arrangement. So the economic agenda was more clear than anything else. When it comes to geopolitical, then is not the same clarity, because as I said, the five founders and the expanded constituency does not share the same, let's say, geopolitical stance with respect to the established powers. So I doubt that we might see, beyond, of course, calls to revamp the Security Council of the UN, but even so, that's not easy. Note that last year, the BRICS manifesto alluded to specific countries, not this time. So not even in the case of the revamp of the Security Council of the UN, the BRICS have managed to single out specific countries. So, but there will be the call for revamp. Lula may complain about the type of financial adjustments that are associated with IMF operations, well, a lot, like many in the past have done and so on, but this has no major consequence. So my point is that on the geopolitical side, I don't foresee, let's say, a major leap forward beyond what individually China and Russia are already doing.
Thank you so much for this very fascinating lecture, Mr. Canuto. Before we close this event, in name of GEBRICS-USP, I would like to make a few announcements. First of all, my name is Priscilla Cottarelli, and I'm currently the GEBRICS General Secretary. And I'm here to bring very exciting news about GEBRICS. First of all, next year, Brazil will hold the BRICS Plus presidency. Thus, we will have a lot of events, very special articles, and important lectures with very different speakers from around the world. If you want to know more about our events and don't miss out, please subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on Instagram. If you are live now with us, both links from the newsletter and Instagram will be here in the live chat. If you're not watching this live, don't worry, you can find all the links in the description of this video. Finally, this year, we partnered with NEBRICS, a research group about BRICS from the Federal University from Bahia. And together with them, we are going to do the first BRICS Summer School. This means that I'll share some of the events information here. So the BRICS Summer School will be held in Salvador. For those who does not know, Salvador was the first capital of Brazil, so it's a very important historical site for Brazil. It will be held in March, and the application process is already open. Here is the information, but you can also find the KIGI code, and we will leave it here for a couple of seconds so you can scan it. But don't worry as well, we will post all the important information on our social medias right after this event. We really hope you enjoyed it. And now I will give the floor to Professor Paulo Casella so he can end this event. Thank you so much for being with us this week, and we really hope to see you in other events.
So again, thank you very much, Otaviano Canuto, for being with us again this year. And we hope to see you in the forthcoming editions of the GEBRICS seminars in the coming years. And also, it is an opportunity to thank the staff of Ebrachina for all the support they give us during our activities and during this entire week. And of course, the GEBRICS is a work group. Thank you so much, Priscilla Cottarelli, and all the researchers and members of the GEBRICS-USP team. You have been doing an outstanding work along the year, and the results are turning up. And the opening session on Monday, I mentioned that we were on the verge of 500 persons participating in the seminar. And today we have added 50 more. We are on 550. In addition to that, along the week, hundreds of persons have followed the registered lectures and panels that we held. So this is a very pleasant, and we are very happy about it, that this work is being perceived and acknowledged, and it can be shared with other colleagues and institutions. So we bring this week of seminars of the GEBRICS to the closing with a golden key. We're having Otaviano Canuto again with us, and thanking all the team of the GEBRICS and hope to see you soon in other events and lectures. So have a nice weekend and bye-bye.
Thank you, Paulo. Priscila, botei o segundo link, viu?